Every time the woman got home from work, her landlord would show up in person to collect rent. But this time, Skye flat out refused for the first time ever, because she'd already set her sights on Chris, the rich guy living nearby. If she could land him, she'd be done with scraping by at the bottom for good. After learning that Chris had a thing for wine, she deliberately soaked herself head to toe and struck up a conversation with him at the grocery store, using "I don't know anything about wine" as her opener. She'd even worn a white shirt on purpose, knowing that soaking wet it would show off her curves. Sure enough, Chris couldn't take his eyes off her. When the moment felt right, Skye played hard to get. With an angel's face on top of a devil's body, who could resist that kind of temptation? Then she pretended her rideshare had been canceled and stood shivering alone on the street corner. Right on cue, Chris offered to drive her home. Skye complained that her roommate was a real lowlife who dragged people back every night to party and raise hell. But she was so broke she had no choice but to split the place with him. Chris suggested she crash at his house for the night, but Skye put on airs and politely turned him down. The second she got out of the car, though, the sounds of people horsing around came drifting out of her apartment. Seeing that Skye couldn't bring herself to go in, Chris simply backed the car up.
Offer still stands.
This time she didn't object, and that night she walked into Chris's mansion. The place was worth $60 million, but to Chris that was just a drop in the bucket. He'd inherited a fortune the moment he graduated college, and at a young age he was already living like a retiree, doing nothing all day but sitting around while millions rolled in. Skye had known all of this for a while, but seeing the over-the-top luxury with her own eyes still made her heart leap. Chris couldn't wait to pop open a bottle, meaning to sip a few glasses to set the mood for their meeting, but Skye downed hers in one gulp. Seeing how game she was, Chris quickly refilled her glass. Back and forth they went, and before long, Skye had had enough to slip out of her jacket, revealing a body that got the blood pumping. But Chris kept up his cool composure, so Skye just slid over and sat right next to him, and that alluring look of hers slowly stirred something in him. He opened his prized wine cabinet, stocked with all kinds of pricey bottles, and deliberately picked out the one most likely to go to your head. The two of them sat on the couch, sipping slowly, and as the alcohol worked its magic, a charged, flirty mood filled the whole house. Chris's intentions were written all over his face, but Skye deliberately held back and instead asked what time it was.
You should probably run me back home. Hopefully Lisa's locked out in an opiate coma by now.
Sure you want to go back there?
No, but what's the alternative?
You can stay.
She caught his drift and quickly took off the glasses that were getting in the way. As for what came next, I'll let you imagine it for yourselves. There's no telling how late into the night the two of them went at it, but by the time Chris opened his eyes, Skye was long gone. Meanwhile, back at her own place, Skye was pretty worn out too, lying in bed and plotting her next move. Chris, who'd been single for a long time, still couldn't get enough, so he headed over to the bar where Skye worked. To keep things going with her, he signed up for a lifetime membership right then and there. This thrilled money-hungry Skye to no end. The minute she got off work, she wrapped her arm around his. The two of them had planned to cut loose again that night, but wouldn't you know it, they ran smack into a car thief who killed the mood. Chris stepped up and ordered him to get lost or he'd call the cops. But the thief was unbelievably brazen. Skye's true colors came out in a flash. She grabbed a bottle and hurled it at him. That set the thief off completely. He swung an iron bar and brought it down hard on Chris's leg, then turned and bolted from the scene. Chris clutched his injured thigh, howling in pain. Just like that, the once handsome, dashing young man was left disabled. His condition now needed someone to look after him, and while he was thinking of hiring a caregiver, Skye spoke up and offered to do it herself. Not only could she give him his meds on schedule, but she could keep him company and have a little fun at night too. Seeing how thoughtful and kind she was, Chris didn't hesitate to give her the code to his front door. Skye went back to her rental and started packing on her own, but the moment her roommate heard she was moving out, he refused to let her go. On the surface, Skye coaxed him gently, but inside she'd already made up her mind to cut him off at the root. After all, the first phase of her plan had paid off, and there was no use keeping this roommate around anymore. When Chris woke up, there was Skye, beaming at him. From that gentle expression, you'd never guess she'd just taken a life. His leg was in a cast, but that didn't get in the way of their intimacy one bit, and so they settled into a life cut off from the outside world. Then one day, the landlord came by to collect rent. He knocked for ages with no answer, so he had to let himself in with the key, and when he went to check the bathroom, he found the roommate already dead in the bathtub. The landlord called the police on the spot and told them the killer was probably Skye, who'd just moved out not long ago. But the investigation ruled it a suicide, and they couldn't dig up a single piece of information on Skye. By this point, Skye grew even more reckless, going so far as to use Chris's facial recognition to transfer money. Chris started getting a vague sense that something was off, so he went through her bag while she was in the shower. But no sooner had he spotted a photo of her and the roommate than Skye walked out of the bathroom. She knew Chris still had his suspicions, so she just tossed a robe at him, leaving him with nothing to say. They say lust is a knife held over your head, but what was waiting for Chris was a bottomless abyss. The next day, he woke up to find his phone gone and all the smart devices in the house inexplicably cut off. The TV happened to be airing a news story about a murder, and Chris recognized the victim at a glance. It was Skye's roommate. Before he could even process it, Skye walked back into the mansion carrying KFC. She wolfed it down without a shred of grace, the sweet, charming act completely gone. Chris pointed out that her roommate had met a gruesome end, but she couldn't have cared less.
Scotty should probably contact the police.
That would be stupid of me.
Why?
Because I'm the one who killed her.
Chris was scared stiff, and Sky, no longer bothering to hide anything, dropped a bombshell. It turned out she'd used the roommate's rental to keep tabs on Chris for 3 whole months. From the chance encounter at the grocery store to the thug who jumped out in the parking lot, it was all an elaborate setup she'd staged herself, all to get her hands on Chris's fortune. Hearing this, Chris wanted to make a run for it, only to realize Sky had already taken his phone, which meant he'd completely lost any control over the house.
Look what I found.
Get that back.
Sorry, lover. Honeymoon's over.
When Chris came to again, he'd been tied to a wheelchair. Sky pressed him for his bank card PIN, but Chris not only kept his mouth shut, he cursed her out. At that, Sky pulled out a power drill. Chris figured she was just trying to scare him, until the next second, when she really did drill a hole into his leg. The searing pain forced Chris to cave, and Sky smoothly transferred tens of millions of dollars. Meanwhile, as the landlord was cleaning out the rental, he came across a pair of binoculars Sky had left behind. He figured he'd sell them for a good price, but when he took a closer look, he caught the exact moment Sky was torturing Chris. He went white as a sheet, but greed quickly took over, because that mansion was hiding a fortune beyond imagining. After finishing the transfers, Sky discovered Chris also held a few $100 million in bearer bonds under his name, and decided to swallow those up too. She picked up a pair of scissors to untie Chris, since his fingerprint was the only key to the lock. But the instant the rope came loose, Chris seized the chance and clamped both hands around her throat. The two of them grappled and crashed to the floor together. In the chaos, Sky got hold of the scissors and drove them deep into Chris's shoulder. Seeing Chris still fighting for his life, Sky had to bring up his ex-wife and kid to threaten him, and that finally shattered his last line of defense. Once he stopped struggling, Sky pulled the plug on every power source in the house, planning to sell off the mansion along with everything valuable in it. When the buyer showed up to inspect the goods, Chris was stunned to realize it was the very same car thief who'd broken his leg. But it was far too late to put it together now. They'd already cleaned the place out, everything but the famous painting hanging on the wall, which they failed to recognize. While the two of them were out fencing the loot, the landlord quietly crept up to the mansion. He grabbed a rock and smashed the glass. Sky's phone got the alarm right away, and she calmly turned the car around and headed back. Chris assumed the landlord had come to rescue him, but the guy was only there to cash in himself. Chris knew Sky would turn back the moment she got the alert, and he desperately begged the landlord to call the police. But the man just kept demanding money over and over. In his desperation, Chris named the sky-high price of that genuine Picasso.
6 or 7 million.
6 or 7 million?
And it's yours.
Only then did the landlord agree to untie him, but the second the tape came off, Sky got back. The landlord went to slip away, only to have Sky lock him inside. He could only grab a small knife to defend himself, but Sky whipped out an extra-long machete that made the landlord's fruit knife look like a toy. He stumbled backward in terror and turned to scramble up to the second floor. Sky was in no rush to chase him. Instead, she first turned Chris to face the right direction so he could enjoy the spectacle of her hunting.
Ronald!
She moved through the hallway unhurriedly, every move the landlord made right under her nose. And before long, she'd cornered him in the bedroom. The landlord begged for mercy, but Sky showed none, kicking him to the floor. While Sky was busy dealing with the landlord, Chris broke free of his restraints and escaped the mansion. But just as he climbed onto a snowmobile, he heard a scream come from inside. He floored it and fled for his life. But going too fast, he hit a rock in the road and crashed hard onto the highway. Luckily, a passing car braked in time, and that was the only reason Chris kept his life. The kind driver helped him into the car, ready to take him to the hospital, and even thoughtfully called the police for him. Chris took the phone and reported all his information in full, but before the call could even end, he sensed something was off, because the driver, still behind the wheel, had taken him right back to that mansion. It was only then that Chris fully understood. This man was actually Sky's stepfather, and so Chris fell back into their clutches. After nightfall, Sky stepped forward and told him all she was after was money. As long as he played along and handed over all the bonds, she'd leave him a way out. But Chris would rather die than give in. Without his fingerprint, no one could open that vault. Still, he'd underestimated this pair of con artists. Sky clamped down on his throat while John pinned his hand to the table and chopped off one of his thumbs. Early the next morning, Chris's ex-wife came by to visit with their daughter. The moment the girl walked in, she went all over the house looking for her dad. But the ex-wife picked up on the strange feeling in the air. She hurried to call her daughter back to her side, but she was a step too late. Sky locked the mother and daughter up with Chris in a dark little room and took their phones. John strapped the thumb to his own hand and, disguised as Chris and his wife, went to the vault, but the fingerprint scan kept failing. Just as the manager was about to call the police, the print finally went through. But when the two of them opened the safe, what was inside wasn't bonds at all. It was divorce papers. As it turned out, when the ex-wife had divided up their shared assets, she'd been so afraid Chris would pull something that she quietly transferred all the bonds out. She never imagined the safeguard she'd set up for herself would, by sheer chance, end up making total fools of the two con artists. Figuring they'd come back for revenge, Chris bet everything on opening the air vent and sending his small daughter through it to open the door from the outside. But the alarm went off yet again, and John saw the whole thing clearly on his phone. Unfortunately, the kid was just a little too slow. The door had barely opened, and before she could escape, the two of them were already back. John decided to split up, leaving the handgun with Sky while he took his phone and searched the other end. He'd just pushed open a door when Chris suddenly lunged out and ambushed him. The phone hit the floor, but injured as he was, Chris was no match. Within a few moves, John had him on the ground. Sky, hearing the commotion, rushed over and raised the gun, demanding Chris hand over the bonds, but a furious John told her to just shoot. Looking at Chris's pitiful state and thinking back on all the years John had bullied and manipulated her, Sky suddenly swung the barrel around and killed John with a single shot. In that very instant, Chris seized the moment, snatched up the phone, and made a break for it. Snapping out of it, Sky flashed a murderous glint in her eyes and chased after him, following the trail of blood on the floor. Chris used the phone to cut the power to the mansion and fired up the thermal imaging system. Using the sound from the smart lock, he tricked Sky into emptying her clip, then caught her off guard and lunged out of the dark. But how could a disabled man alone ever go up against someone as skilled as Sky? Just as Chris was about to be done for, the ex-wife came charging out of nowhere, grabbed Sky by the hair, and slammed her head into the screen. But Sky was a battle-hardened pro, and after a few rounds, the couple was simply no match for her. At the critical moment, a gunshot suddenly rang out, bang, and Sky dropped to the floor. To everyone's surprise, it was the daughter who pulled off this nail-biting reversal, and that was how the two of them finally escaped death. Sometimes you think you've stumbled into a romantic fling, only for it to turn out to be a trap someone carefully laid for you. Man or woman, whenever you're out there in the world, you have to be sure to protect yourself.